This morning, the biting cold of Salt Lake City seemed even darker than usual. James Thompson, a 30-year-old man, stood frozen on the porch, his hand gripping his phone as it vibrated uncontrollably. His heart stopped for a moment when he saw it was a call from his mother, Sarah Thompson. Her voice was weak, filled with confusion, as though she was trying to hide a fear she couldn't conceal. "James, you need to listen. Our bank account, it's been drained. I don't understand what's happening. Do you know anything about this?" James couldn't believe his ears. Just a few days ago, he had trusted in the security of his family. Now everything had changed. He knew this wasn't just an accident. The only name that popped into his head was Aunt Caroline. His aunt, someone he'd always considered part of the family, a trusted relative. But now doubts began to creep into his mind. He quickly hung up the phone, a sense of unease settling in, anxiety building up. Every detail started to flood his mind. The past conversations, the times Aunt Caroline had always appeared right when things got tough, always there during the most challenging moments his family faced. Determined not to let this slide without action, James decided to investigate. He needed to understand what had happened. As his thoughts spiraled, he recalled the moment a few years ago when Aunt Caroline had stepped in to help his family financially during a rough patch. But now, James knew something wasn't right. There was something darker, something he'd never seen before. He quietly stepped inside the house, resolved to uncover the truth. But he also knew that this journey wouldn't be easy, because when the traitor is family, everything becomes far more complicated than ever before. James Thompson is a 30-year-old man living in Salt Lake City, Utah. He works in finance, a job that demands high focus and sharp analytical skills. While his work life can be stressful at times, James has always viewed his family as his rock. He is a logical person who regularly makes rational decisions, but today, everything has changed. Sarah Thompson, James's mother, is a gentle yet strong woman. She raised James on her own from the time he was young. Though life was never easy, she always gave all her love to her son and family. Sarah isn't one to openly express her emotions, but moments like these reveal a worry in her heart that she can't hide. When she called James, her voice was weak, as if fear had completely overtaken her mind. While James has always been proud of his mother, Caroline Mitchell, his aunt, is the one who has always maintained a flawless image in front of everyone. Caroline is a beautiful, intelligent woman who's extremely successful in her career. She knows how to build relationships with those around her and seems to always be at the center of every family event. Since he was a child, James had always admired his aunt, the one who always knew how to help and encourage him at every step of the way. Caroline had always been there when the family needed financial assistance. Whenever the family faced hardships, she would be ready to help without hesitation. And now, with the family's bank account drained, James couldn't help but think of her. This not only confused him, but also raised suspicions about his aunt's actions. Ethan Thompson, James's older brother, is a quiet, somewhat shy person who tries to maintain harmony within the family. Though he's not directly involved in the family's financial matters, Ethan has always supported his mother and brother, doing his best to help them in any situation. However, as James begins to suspect Aunt Caroline, Ethan seems unwilling to confront the truth. He doesn't want to disrupt the family's peace, and at times he simply wants to avoid any conflict. Olivia Miller, James's girlfriend, is always there to support him in any situation. Olivia is a strong, decisive woman who constantly encourages James when he needs to make difficult decisions. However, in this case, Olivia is feeling confused. She's worried as she sees James becoming more hardened in his relationship with his family. Olivia doesn't want his family to suffer any more pain, but she also understands that James is facing an important choice and can't turn back. As James begins gathering evidence about Caroline's actions, he can't help but feel torn. He has always trusted his aunt, but now everything has become more complicated than ever before. This leaves him feeling uncertain, not only about his family, but also about the decisions he's making in his life. He feels as though he's being pulled into a battle that he can't escape, and every step he takes is full of risk. However, the truth is slowly becoming clearer, and James knows he can't continue living in the shadows of lies. He decides he has to do something, not only for his family, but for himself. He can't let the people he loves be manipulated by someone he once considered the closest family member. This resolve pushes James to begin a deeper investigation to uncover the truth and bring justice to his family. James couldn't stop his thoughts. Every time he looked at the phone in his hand, his mind spun. His mother, Sarah, had informed him that the family's bank account had been drained, and this didn't seem like a typical incident. While his mother still didn't understand exactly what was going on, James had already realized that something was off, and the person behind it could only be Aunt Caroline. He began thinking about all the times Aunt Caroline had helped his family. She was always there at just the right moment when his family faced financial trouble. The money she sent, the valuable gifts, the advice on how to budget and save, it all seemed like acts of kindness from a beloved relative. But now James knew there was something very wrong about all of this. He decided to dig deeper. That night, after discussing his concerns with Olivia, James began rummaging through the family's financial information. He opened emails, receipts, and bank statements that his mother had kept and started comparing them. Everything seemed fine until he discovered something strange. A large sum of money had been transferred from the family's account to an unknown bank account. Shocked, James immediately called his mother to verify the information. "Mom, has Aunt Caroline been transferring money into her account over the past few months?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Sarah didn't respond immediately, which made James even more uneasy. "Are you sure? I don't know anything about this," his mother replied, her voice trembling. "Tell me, James, what do you think Aunt Caroline has been doing?" James could no longer think of stopping. His suspicions grew stronger with each passing moment. He knew that what he was doing could tear his family apart, but he couldn't ignore it. He decided he would confront Aunt Caroline. But how could he address this issue without causing more harm to the family? That was the big question weighing on James's mind. The next day, he quietly went to seek more information from other sources. He reached out to Caroline's old friends and colleagues looking for clues that his aunt may have left behind. Not long after, one of Caroline's friends, who worked in finance, shared a story that deepened James's confusion. Caroline had contacted him a few years ago asking for help with a large loan. The loan was said to be for family support, but no one knew the details. What was suspicious was that this loan was never recorded in any official records. James was hit with a new shock. Not only was he facing the possibility that Caroline had been manipulating the family's finances, but he could also be dealing with a network involved in shady, possibly illegal financial activities. That was when he knew he had to act. But could he solve everything with such limited evidence? The following night, James decided to meet with Caroline. He didn't tell his mother or Ethan about the plan because he didn't want to cause too much tension before he could figure things out. He had prepared a few questions, and this time he wouldn't let her deceive him again. He arranged to meet Caroline at a small cafe, a place where no one could interrupt. As usual, his aunt appeared very caring, but James could sense the tension in every look and word. Caroline, I need you to tell me about the money in the family's account. I've seen things that don't add up. Why are there transactions like these that we were never informed about? James asked, unable to hide the anger in his voice. Caroline tried to remain calm. James, I don't know what you're talking about. You're overreacting. Surely there's some misunderstanding. I just wanted to help the family. But James wasn't so easily fooled. He had already prepared some documents showing the amounts that Aunt Caroline had transferred into her account. He placed them on the table, his eyes sharp like a knife. If you truly just wanted to help, why didn't you tell us? Why hide everything? Can you explain that to me? The two of them sat in silence, staring at each other. This was the moment when James felt everything beginning to shift. He wasn't just facing an aunt he had once loved, but someone who had been exploiting his family for years. And now, the unavoidable battle had begun. As soon as the confrontation with Aunt Caroline ended, James couldn't calm his mind. Although she denied all the accusations, the unease inside him only grew. He knew his suspicions weren't unfounded. Everything was becoming clearer, and he couldn't turn back now. Something darker was waiting for him ahead, and he needed to face it. When he returned home, James continued to go through the documents he had gathered. Hours passed in silence, with only the sound of paper flipping and the steady hum of his computer. The deeper he delved into his family's financial transactions, the more he felt the truth slowly emerging. He found more transactions he had no knowledge of, unexplained loans, banking transactions with no reasonable justification. But what stood out the most was a particularly suspicious detail. A large sum of money had been transferred into Aunt Caroline's account from another account James didn't recognize. With each detail he uncovered, James's anxiety only intensified. He couldn't just keep doubting anymore. He decided he needed to learn more about these loans and started reaching out to Caroline's old friends and colleagues. Though he hadn't wanted to worry his family, he realized he was the only one who could uncover the truth. The next morning, James met with Jake, an old friend of Caroline's who worked in finance. Jake had been Caroline's colleague at an investment company. James knew he couldn't let this opportunity slip by. When he asked about the suspicious signs he had found in Caroline's transactions, Jake became tense and tried to avoid answering. However, after a period of silence, Jake finally revealed something important to James. Caroline, she's been in contact with a few people in the financial industry. She asked me to help her with a large loan a few years ago, but I never expected she'd keep deceiving others like this. I think she's been setting up a plan to destroy the trust of your whole family, Jake said, his voice low and full of concern. James felt another piece of the puzzle fall into place. Aunt Caroline wasn't just manipulating his family. She had a network of people in the financial industry supporting her. His family was caught in a much larger scheme that they had no idea about. James knew he couldn't back down anymore. From this point forward, James became even more determined. He started planning specifically how he would confront Aunt Caroline again, but this time it wouldn't be a one-on-one meeting at a cafe. He decided that he needed to bring everyone into the situation, to make them aware of the truth and confront the issue together. But before doing so, James knew he needed solid evidence, strong proof that no one could dismiss. Calls and meetings with Caroline's old friends continued, and James uncovered more and more truths about his aunt's wrongdoings. He found new evidence, emails, phone exchanges, and irrefutable documents. However, things weren't that simple. One morning, while at work in his office, James suddenly received a call from his mother. Sarah informed him that Aunt Caroline had come to the house and spoken to her about the financial issues they were facing. Caroline claimed that James was overreacting and that there was no need to worry. But a deep sense of concern began to envelop James. Aunt Caroline wasn't just dealing with him, she was trying to convince the entire family of her lies. James felt time was running out. He knew that if he didn't act soon, Aunt Caroline would continue destroying everything his family had built. With the evidence in hand, James decided he would confront Aunt Caroline once more. But this time, there would be no leniency or easy way out. He would do whatever it took to protect his family, no matter the difficulties or challenges ahead. Each passing day, James felt the tension inside him grow. He couldn't shake the thought that Aunt Caroline had been manipulating everything in the family, not just financially, but also in the relationships between family members. Every time James looked at the documents he had collected, a sense of unease consumed him. The truth, painful as it was slowly coming to light. James decided to meet Caroline again, but this time it wouldn't be a private meeting. He knew that confronting her alone wouldn't resolve anything. He understood that the threat Caroline posed was too great, and he could only face her with all the evidence he had gathered. He decided to confront her with his mother and brother at a family meeting where the truth would be exposed for everyone to see. That day, the atmosphere in the house felt as if it was shrouded in a heavy fog. Sarah sat silently at the dining table, her hands clenched, both anxious and determined. Ethan, James's brother, sat beside her, unable to hide the tension in his eyes. He didn't want to break the peace in the family, but he also realized that things were getting out of control. "I know Aunt Caroline isn't a good person," James said to his mother, his voice firm. "But I can't let this go on any longer. She's done too many wrong things, Mom. I have to face her." Sarah looked at her son, concern filling her gaze. "James, I understand, but don't do something we can't take back. Aunt Caroline is family. We can't make things this big." But James knew his mother was worried. She just wanted to preserve the peace in the family and didn't want things to get worse. But James also knew that if he didn't act now, his family would continue to be pulled deeper into the tragedy that Aunt Caroline had created. He couldn't let her keep deceiving them. When Caroline walked into the living room, she still carried the perfect appearance she always did, wearing a fake smile. But James' gaze was unwavering. He knew this confrontation would be different from the others. "Hello, everyone. I just came to visit Mom, but I heard something's not right," Caroline said, her voice calm but with an underlying hint of disdain. James stood up, never taking his eyes off her. "Aunt Caroline, I know everything now. I have all the evidence of what you've done to my family, and today you won't get away with it." Caroline froze but quickly regained her composure. She smiled, her tone steady but laced with challenge. "What's this, James? What have you done? I don't understand what you're talking about. Everything I've done is to help your family. Why do you doubt me?" James wasn't fooled anymore. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the evidence he had collected over the past weeks. Bank transactions, phone conversations, proof of loans that Caroline had manipulated in his family's name. Piece by piece, each detail was revealed in front of her. "Do you think I didn't know? You've been transferring money from my mom's account into your own. You've been taking loans without telling anyone. You've exploited our family, manipulating everyone for your own benefit," James shouted, no longer able to contain his anger. Caroline's eyes flickered with fear, but she quickly regained her composure. "This is all a misunderstanding, James. You can't understand what I've done for your family. I've done everything for you, for this family to be happy." But James didn't believe her anymore. He continued to expose all the evidence he had found: photos, phone calls, and text messages. Caroline had no way to deny it anymore. "Do you really think you can do all this and get away with it?" James said coldly. "You've done too many awful things to protect yourself while forgetting that family is the most important thing." "I won't let you destroy our lives any longer." When Caroline realized she couldn't escape anymore, she started to fumble. Her sweet words and justifications no longer had any effect. James now had the power and evidence to confront her, and one more thing: his family would never forgive her. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with tension. Every eye in the family was fixed on James and Caroline, as if time had stopped, leaving only the suffocating space filled with secrets waiting to be exposed. This was no longer just a matter between two people. Now, everything had to face the truth and justice. Caroline, the Aunt James had once admired and trusted, was no longer the perfect woman he thought she was. Her justifications became more and more hollow, like meaningless lies that couldn't conceal the dark truth slowly coming to light. She stood there, her eyes no longer shining with confidence, only a dull, anxious, and fearful look. "James, I don't understand why you're doing this," Caroline said, her voice no longer calm. "Everything I've done, I just wanted to help your family." James stared directly into her eyes without hesitation. He no longer felt any sympathy or respect for her. All he felt was one thing: justice must be served. He had heard enough of these lies. Instead of just revealing the evidence he had gathered, he decided to show Caroline the consequences of her actions. "My mother trusted you," James spoke firmly. "You said you'd help, but all you've done is destroy. What you've done not only put my family in danger, but also made me lose trust in the ones closest to me." Caroline opened her mouth to say something, but James wouldn't let her interrupt. He slammed each document onto the table in front of her, evidence that was undeniable, a loan agreement that Caroline had signed without the family's approval. A series of money transfers, all done under the guise of financial help, but in reality, they were shady transactions James had only recently discovered. "Do you think you can keep deceiving us forever?" James continued, his voice hard. "You've exploited our family's trust to do things no one knew, no one saw. But you were wrong. Now it's time for you to pay for what you've done." Caroline's face changed color. She swallowed hard, clearly struggling to maintain her composure, but she couldn't. She couldn't hide her fear anymore. The evidence, the recorded calls, the text messages James had collected left her with no room to escape. James stood tall, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm ready to bring everything to light. You can keep blaming me, but I'm no longer afraid of you. This is the truth, Caroline, and you will have to face it." Caroline lowered her eyes, her hands trembling as she tried to come up with another lie. But in the end, all she could do was remain silent, unable to make any more excuses. The things James had exposed were too clear, and there was no way she could deny them. "James," Caroline choked, her voice weak, "I haven't done anything wrong. Everything I've done was for your family. Everyone. They've all misunderstood." James didn't bother with her words anymore. He had enough evidence to take this to a higher level. He couldn't let Caroline's greed and manipulation continue to harm his family, and he was ready to confront her. "No, you haven't done anything wrong," James responded, his voice steady. "You've tried to manipulate everyone in our family for your own benefit." "No one can trust you anymore, Caroline." The room fell silent. Only the sound of Caroline's heavy breathing filled the air. She stood there, unable to justify herself any longer, unable to escape the truth. Inside James, his anger had subsided, replaced by resolve and defiance toward the damage she had caused. A battle had begun, and James knew that even if it meant sacrificing family relationships, he would not allow the truth to be buried any longer. He was ready to bring everything into the light, no matter the cost. After the intense confrontation with Caroline, James knew that things were no longer simple. Although she had been exposed, the issue wasn't just about facing off and arguing within the family. The truth was, Caroline's actions not only harmed James's family, but could also lead to serious legal consequences. James understood that now his fight wasn't just a family matter, it was a fight for justice. After the confrontation, James immediately contacted Elizabeth, a lawyer friend who had always supported him in difficult times. Elizabeth listened to the story, and it didn't take long for her to realize that this wasn't a simple family issue. This could involve financial crimes, and Caroline might have to face serious charges. James, what she's done isn't just manipulating the family, it's financial fraud and potentially large-scale deception. We can't let this just be a family dispute. You need to take everything to the legal level, Elizabeth said, her voice firm and full of resolve. I'll help you gather the necessary evidence and prepare the case files, but you need to be ready for a long battle. James heeded Elizabeth's advice and decided not to delay any further. He began to map out a detailed plan on how to bring the situation to light. While his family remained stunned and worried, James couldn't let the truth be ignored any longer. He needed to act immediately. In the following days, James and Elizabeth met with financial experts and lawyers, gathering each document and piece of evidence to build their legal case. They started reviewing all the loans and bank transactions Caroline had made. The evidence James had previously gathered, from forged contracts to suspicious transfers, now became solid grounds to take the case to court. Meanwhile, Caroline continued to remain silent. She knew that everything had gotten out of hand, but she still refused to admit her wrongs. She began seeking connections and help from people who might prevent James from winning this fight, but things were no longer as easy as before. One day, James received a notification from the court asking him and Elizabeth to present the evidence in the investigation. The legal battle officially began. James felt a fresh surge of energy, as if he had regained strength in a fight not just against Aunt Caroline, but against the entire legal system to protect his family. However, what worried James the most wasn't the court, but the people in his family. He couldn't forget that even though Caroline had done wrong, she was still part of the family. He knew that some would oppose him, that some would side with her, and the lies she had created could hurt the relationships he had fought so hard to maintain. "James, are you sure about this?" Sarah, his mother, asked anxiously. She understood this was an important decision, and although she stood by her son, she couldn't help but feel heartbroken to face a family member this way. "I can't just stand by, Mom," James replied, his voice resolute. "I know this will be hard, but if we don't do something, we'll lose everything. Aunt Caroline has destroyed not just our family, but also the values we've built over the years. I have to do this." In the days leading up to the trial, James and Elizabeth prepared. Each day the tension grew. The courtroom wasn't a place for emotions to dictate actions. He needed to stay sharp, and above all, he had to fight with evidence and truth. On the day of the trial, his whole family stood beside him. James walked into the courtroom with a clear resolve, not just to protect his family, but to bring justice to those who had been hurt over the years. But as the trial began, James realized one thing. This wasn't just a battle to win. It was a battle to save the honor and integrity of his family. The trial had begun, and all the tension James had endured over the past weeks now converged into this moment. He stood in the courtroom, feeling as though everything around him blurred. Every eye was on him and Caroline, and now the truth would finally be exposed. In stark contrast to James's tension, Caroline walked into the courtroom with overconfidence, almost arrogance. She wore an expensive business suit, high heels, and sat down without hesitation. Her hair was neatly styled, and her face remained calm, as if this was just another ordinary conversation. But James knew, beneath that perfect exterior, was someone desperately trying to hide all the dark deeds she had committed. While Caroline's lawyer began to present arguments in her defense, James couldn't sit still. He felt a surge of energy, and everything he had prepared for in the past week suddenly became crystal clear. He stood up, his hands clenched and his gaze as hard as steel. Your Honor, I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to face a family member. But when the truth is hidden, when actions of manipulation and deceit toward my family continue, I can no longer stay silent. James spoke up, his voice echoing in the courtroom, firm and powerful. James's words felt like a declaration of war, not just against Caroline, but against the entire system she had built. His words weren't the result of sudden anger, but rather a cold, deliberate clarity, determined to expose the truth. Caroline looked at him, but her confidence was no longer as strong. She hadn't expected James to have the courage and resolve to bring everything to light. Though she tried to maintain her calm demeanor, the fear was evident in her eyes. My son isn't the only one who's been hurt by your actions, Caroline, James continued, each word a sharp blow aimed at her arrogance. You've betrayed the trust of this family, making us live in deception for years. Unclear transactions, loans with no reasons, and all the evidence I've gathered proves one thing. You're not the person I thought you were, Caroline. Caroline's composure began to crack as she nervously glanced down at the documents on the table. Indeed, the irrefutable evidence was now in front of her. Each transaction, each text message, each email she had sent, everything was now in court. What Caroline had done could no longer be hidden, but she still refused to admit anything. James, you don't understand. Everything I did was for the benefit of the family. We all needed the money. You can't put all the blame on me, Caroline said, her voice growing weak. But James didn't stop. He had prepared far too carefully, not only with evidence, but also with testimonies from those who had been manipulated by Caroline. He had everything he needed to corner her beyond denial. No, Caroline, I understand very well, and I won't let the truth be buried anymore, James said, his eyes unwavering. You think you can manipulate us forever. You can't keep living behind this facade. Everyone in my family deserves to know the truth. At this moment, the room fell silent, as if everyone realized that James's words were not just simple criticism, but a statement about the power of truth. James had fully prepared to fight, not just for his family, but for the values he had always believed in. Caroline could feel the situation slipping away. She couldn't turn the tide anymore, couldn't use sweet lies to deceive anyone. All she could do now was face the truth and deal with the consequences of her actions. This legal battle was no longer just about James and Caroline. It was a fight for truth, a battle that every family must face when confronted with deception and greed. You can't back out now, Caroline, James said, his voice decisive. Now it's time for you to pay for what you've done. The courtroom now felt like a battlefield, with every eye focused on Caroline, the aunt once considered an important part of the family. Her justifications no longer held up against the irrefutable evidence James had brought forward. Despite her efforts to maintain composure, Caroline knew that everything was spiraling out of control. All her manipulation and deceit had now been exposed, and the truth could no longer be denied. James stood there, not feeling any sense of triumph or satisfaction, just a cold calm. He had spent too much time and effort gathering this evidence. And he knew that, no matter the family wounds it might cause, he wouldn't stop until justice was served. Caroline's lawyer finally realized that there was no way out. He lifted his head, his eyes full of disappointment, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, we cannot deny the evidence presented by the plaintiff. We acknowledge that some of Ms. Mitchell's actions were wrong." Caroline stared at James, her eyes full of both hatred and fear. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat, unable to utter any words. I didn't do anything wrong." Caroline finally spoke, but her voice now lacked the usual confidence, replaced by trembling. "Everything I did was for the family. I just wanted everyone to be happy." James no longer felt pity or any emotion for her. Her justifications meant nothing now. He had witnessed enough deceit, and he couldn't allow her to continue exploiting the family's trust any longer. "For the family? You can't imagine that deceiving all of us, manipulating both our finances and our emotions could be called for the family?" James said, his voice unwavering. "You've made us lose faith in family, and now you have to face the consequences." The judge listened intently to every word James said, then he raised his gavel and tapped it lightly on the table. "The court's decision is that Ms. Caroline Mitchell must return all the money she manipulated from the family and will be further investigated for financial fraud. Additionally, she will be held legally accountable for her fraudulent and manipulative actions." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Caroline stood there, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. She had thought she could escape everything, that her family and the court would never uncover her dark deeds, but now she realized that there was no place left for deception. The court had made its decision, but James knew this wasn't just a legal victory. It was a warning about lies and manipulation, that the truth would always find a way to rise. He had fought not only for his family, but for the values of honesty and justice. After the trial ended, James turned to look at his mother. Sarah, who had always tried to keep the family at peace, now looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and pride. Despite all the hardship and pain they had endured, the family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The truth had been revealed, and they no longer had to live in fear and doubt. "Thank you, James," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you. You've brought justice to our family." James smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the smile of someone who knew that, no matter what life threw at them, protecting his family and justice was always the most important thing. Meanwhile, Caroline still stood in the courtroom, her hands trembling as the judge ordered her to leave. She couldn't believe everything had come to an end, that she had lost in this battle. As Caroline exited the courtroom, James merely watched her, feeling no sense of joy. He knew that the price wasn't just about money, it was about the loss and the trust that had been shattered. However, he understood that his family could now begin again, could heal the wounds, because they had stood up for the truth. After the trial, James's family began to feel the change. No longer were there long nights of anxiety about facing deceit, no more lingering questions about what had truly happened in the past. Although Caroline had been legally processed and had to face the consequences of her actions, James and his family knew that their journey was just beginning. Sarah, James's mother, was the first to feel the shift. She wasn't someone who easily showed her emotions, but after everything that had happened, she felt an immense relief in her heart. Though the pain of facing a family member remained, she knew that the family wouldn't be torn apart any longer. Everything had been brought to light, and now it was time to begin again. One evening after the trial, James's family gathered together in the living room, the place where they had shared so many joyous and painful memories. The atmosphere was no longer heavy or stifling like before. Ethan, James's older brother, sat quietly at the table, but he no longer wore the look of worry that had once plagued him. He looked at his mother and brother, and in his eyes there was a sense of peace returning. I don't know what to say. Everything that has happened made me feel like I had lost my family, but now I realize that no matter how hard things get, family is what matters most, Ethan said softly, his voice thoughtful but full of reflection. I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner. James looked at him, no resentment in his heart. He knew that fear and avoidance had kept Ethan from standing up, but now everything was different. They had all learned valuable lessons from the challenges their family had faced. Sarah smiled gently, her eyes filled with appreciation. We've made it through the hardest times. Now it's time for us to come closer, to heal the wounds, whether they're within the family or in our hearts. Olivia, James's girlfriend, had always been by his side throughout this battle. She wasn't just the person who loved him, but also a solid friend who had always encouraged and supported him in every decision. We've always stood by each other, haven't we? Olivia said, holding James's hand. This fight wasn't just yours, it was for the whole family. We'll start again, rebuild what was lost. James looked at Olivia and felt his heart warm. She had become such an important part of his life, and her presence was now a constant source of encouragement. He knew that even though his family had been through so much, with love and truth, they could overcome anything. A week later, Sarah started working again in the garden, a place where she always found peace when needing to relieve her worries. I'll begin with the smallest things, she said as she stood by the breakfast table. Thank you for helping me see more clearly. I was wrong not to face the truth sooner. James smiled as he looked at his mother. You've always done well, and I know you've always worried. But now you don't have to worry anymore. We'll move forward together, and nothing will stop us. Now James and his family had started again with the simplest of things. While they couldn't completely erase the scars left by Caroline, they had realized that love and honesty would make them stronger. The evenings spent together, family meals, or simply sitting and talking about old memories, had become precious moments they could never afford to lose. In the months that followed, James's family slowly regained peace. Caroline, despite being a family member, could no longer destroy the harmony they had worked so hard to build. The wounds slowly healed, and though the family couldn't forget what had happened, they had learned to live with it, learning to let go of the pain and rebuild a new life. Finally, after all the turmoil, James's family had found peace again. Their story wasn't just a legal battle to protect their honor and finances. It was a journey of overcoming pain, betrayal, and loss. But one thing was clear. Nothing could break the love within a family if they were strong enough to face the truth. James sat in the living room, his gaze overwhelming love that words could hardly express. James, you've shown me that sometimes, to protect the ones we love, we can't hesitate to do the hard thing. You've protected our family, and I thank you for that. James smiled gently. You taught me that family is everything. Sometimes we have to sacrifice personal things to protect what's most important in life. But what matters is that we don't let fear or worry stand in the way of what's right. In the days that followed, Ethan, James's older brother, began to realize the lessons this battle had taught him. He no longer felt afraid to face the truth, and he started standing up, not just for the family, but also for himself. He and James began discussing the changes in their family and how they could rebuild trust in one another. No more conflicts or avoidance. Now they faced every issue together, stronger than ever before. Olivia, James's girlfriend, had always been there for him throughout this difficult journey. She had seen him grow through each challenge. The article quickly gained attention from the community. The positive responses from readers made him feel that he had done the right thing. He hadn't just helped his family, each family member still remained. However, Jennifer felt alone. She was not only his partner, but also his battle on through similar painful stories like his family's, where they could find help. Accountable for her actions, had gradually withdrawn from James's family's life. She in his family's life.